At Tbilisi's recently opened free theatre, the audience never quite knows what to expect. Just in case, they're draped in sheets of plastic. The show begins with an angry monologue against Georgia's political establishment. Such free speech was unthinkable only a few years ago. Wanting to check the time, the actor persuades one member of the audience to lend him his wristwatch. There's worse to come. Soon more actors join in, pelting the audience with rotten fruit, eggs and paint. As theatre goes, it's volatile and unpredictable, much like Georgia itself. A decade after independence from the Soviet Union, Georgians are still struggling to redefine themselves.
These three generations completely emasculated politically, economically, socially, culturally. How we can expect to have normal country in 10 years, especially in Georgia, where everyone is king and everyone is, how to say, lady killer and best drunkard in the world, and the most intelligent man. So it's quite difficult how to forge so many geniuses in one democratic country.
Within months of Georgia's independence from the crumbling Soviet bloc, it was itself falling apart. The western region of Abkhazia declared itself a breakaway republic. Soon after, the province of South Ossetia also began clamouring for independence. In the 10 years of fighting in Abkhazia, thousands have died and hundreds of thousands of refugees have fled their homes. Abkhazian refugees throw petrol bombs whilst being evicted from a botanical institute near Georgia's capital, Tbilisi. Crowded into government-owned buildings and hotels across Georgia, thousands of refugees have laid to waste the country's tourist infrastructure. Fights with police are commonplace. It's just one of many problems which threaten to overwhelm Georgia's president, Eduard Shevardnadze, and this unusual and fragile democracy. But Shevardnadze has faced even deadlier threats. This is closed-circuit TV footage of the second attempt on his life in 1998. Remarkably, despite the destruction, Shevardnadze survived the bombing. By then, he was already getting used to it. 3 years earlier, he escaped a machine gun attack which left 2 of his bodyguards dead. Georgia remains a tense place.
If I'm driving and I don't have a cap on, the police recognizes me, and if I do violate something, they don't stop.
This is Akaki Gogichaishvili, the face of investigative journalism in Georgia. Wearing a cap as a simple disguise might seem a touch paranoid, but as the presenter of Georgia's hard-hitting version of the 60 Minutes program, he's got sound reason to be on his guard.
So we at large create a political season in this country, and politics at large based on what we report and show. So we very often set a political agenda in this country. We had lots of threats from different governmental structures as well as private business. I will remember, for example, when President of the country himself made a speech in front of the governmental session, and it was broadcasted. And he said that 60 Minutes, this is a program that works against the country, against the nation, and that the anchor, which is me, has evil in his eyes. And when in the country like Georgia, a president says like that, things like that, that's very scary.
Today, Akaki has dropped in at police headquarters to witness the inauguration of Tbilisi's new police chief. He's been invited because his program exposed the corruption and inefficiency under Tbilisi's last chief of police. The new chief is nervous, the atmosphere tense, but Akaki is treated with a wary respect.
We're, human beings, and we get frightened as well as anyone does. But our solution so far, our experience through all these kinds of attacks is that you shouldn't give in. The moment you give in and do some compromise, that means the end of anything.
Akaki came up with the idea of an investigative TV program for Georgia while studying journalism in the United States. The journalists here call it 60 Minutes of Democracy. With fewer desks than reporters, this tiny office doesn't look much, but it's the base of the gutsiest television current affairs program on air in the former Soviet Union.
I was warned that there was already hired a killer who is, who has a list of me and other two top managers and Akaki himself on Rustavi too, and please be careful, and phone calls and messages like that. So it's not very easy to do that job.
Rustavi 2 is the independent television station which broadcasts Akaki's 60 Minutes program. Combined with its independent news service, Rustavi 2 has become the most popular channel in Georgia. Nick Tabataadze, just 27 years old, doubles as newsreader and chief executive officer, and is already a deft hand deflecting political and commercial pressures.
The first program of 60 Minutes was devoted to the businesses which are run by Shevardnadze, the president's family, and one of them runs a huge mobile phone telecommunication business. And just after the program, he refused to place any advertisement, to be a media buyer on Rustavi 2, and the only source of the revenue for us is advertising. So we lost that media buyer, but for us the main principle was the freedom of speech, the truth, which we are following to tell to our viewers.
Despite mounting commercial threats and worse, Rustavi 2 pressed ahead with its independent reporting, uncovering corruption and increasingly critical of the government. On the 26th of July last year, the stakes changed. One of Rustavi's most popular journalists, Georgi Sanaya, was found dead. The indications were of an execution-style killing. Sanaya had been working on a story about drug smuggling in Georgia's Pankisi Gorge and was trying to obtain a videotape linking top government officials to the racket. Thousands of people attended his funeral. The massive outpouring of public sympathy was also a demonstration of people's disgust at Georgia's lawlessness. After several months, a former policeman confessed to the murder, but most of Sanaya's colleagues believe there was another killer and that the policeman took the rap in a deal to clear his gambling debts.
If the official investigation will decide that this was an accident, that they had some argument and because of that he shot the person, by our local law it envisages only up to 5 years of imprisonment, which is usually the case. When they want, they can, after a year, for example, they will say, okay, it's now you have to serve 3 years, and then after a year they will release the person.
On the 31st of October last year, the government finally made its move against the crusading TV station. Georgian intelligence, tax and police officials barged into Rustavi's Tbilisi offices. Their pretext was financial irregularities at the station. What they didn't count on were quick-thinking journalists who broadcast the raid live.
იქნებ ვინმე მიცის აქ უშროების რამდენი წარმომადგენლები იქნებ ვინმე მიცით რატომ მოხვედით აქ არც თქვენ არიცით გაქვთ თუ არა ოფიციალური საბუთი გაქვთ თუ არა ოფიციალური დასკვნა რის საფუძველზე ჩემოდიხართ კერძო საკუთრებაში ეს არის კერძო ტელეკომპანიის ოფისი
კარგად ზანდებოდეთ მოკითხვა უფროსებს
დავამეხა როგორ კერძო საკუთრება დავიცვათ თუ როგორ აქვს
We broadcasted our office flooded with these officers of security. By the time their number was about 100, and they weren't doing anything, but the whole situation was really chaotic and hysterical.
This dramatic live broadcast prompted an unprecedented public response. Within minutes, as many as 100 people jammed the entrance to the station to prevent further attacks. As the police beat a hasty retreat, the public response seemed unstoppable. Within 24 hours, thousands had amassed in an anti-government demonstration. Shevardnadze had no choice. To defuse the crisis, he sacked the entire government and pledged his commitment to freedom of speech. For Akaki Gogichaishvili, the public reaction had a special meaning.
After years of no effect, no results on your shows, you always ask this question, why you're doing this? You know, what is the reason we are doing this? And when I saw this public support, this was the answer on my doubts that this is why we are working, because public wants it and public is supporting it.
Someone in history will tell that this is the television channel which ousted the government, so we'll be very proud to hear that. But definitely that was not our intention at the first. We were just defending ourselves, nothing else.
Georgia is a very difficult country, you know. We have no experience of modern democratic statehood, not only democratic and modern statehood. So to create modern state is a tremendous, gigantic task, which even for Mr. Shevardnadze is quite difficult, and he understood it. He is more experienced in foreign policy, and also, you know, he's dealing with very strong neighbors without anything in his sense. What kind of cards he has? Nothing.
Alexander Rondelli heads up one of Georgia's leading political and strategic think tanks. He believes it's Russia's inability to let go of supposedly independent Georgia that's creating problems. For example, there are still Russian military bases in the capital, Tbilisi, and other parts of Georgia. It's a source of constant tension.
It's not easy to escape this bear which is at your doors. But now, especially during, you know, last 2 months, I would say even 1 month maybe, Russian pressure and Russian blackmail is growing. And if you read Russian newspapers or watch Russian TV, you will see that Georgia is portrayed there like enemy number one.
An hour out of Tbilisi, at the Azureti military base, foreign defence attachés watched the Georgian special forces do their thing. But these exercises are controversial. The weapons and training are part of a $64 million military upgrade provided by Washington. This new US toehold in the region makes Russia very uneasy. These commandos will be used in America's war on terror to flush out so-called terrorists from Georgia's volatile border regions, like the Pankisi Gorge on the border with Chechnya.
Together with American help, We have probably the best quality of training and equipment, which we desperately need. And also financial resources will be available. Together with this program, we will develop ourselves in Georgia special programs to, for example, to incorporate a professional army.
The US alliance is Shevardnadze's latest foreign policy ploy, and yet another point of friction between Georgia and its powerful neighbour Russia.
Что касается возможного появления американских военных в Грузии, то с нашей точки зрения это могло бы еще больше осложнить и без того непростую ситуацию в регионе.
When you are constantly humiliated by your more powerful neighbor, which teaches you every day how to behave, and believes that you are his possession still, it's always better to see someone stronger who comes and at least morally supports you.
Okay. Hi. Try to raise your arm now.
At the Georgian Defence Ministry, colonels and secretaries alike come together for their daily English lesson.
What tense? What tense? Present perfect.
It's yet another demonstration of the American-led westernisation of Georgia's military. Officially, Russia's President Putin has not opposed the US presence in Georgia, remarking that it was no great tragedy. But in Russia's parliament, the response has been acid. Russian nationalists have fuelled an anti-Georgian campaign which continues to grow. Some commentators are worried that Russia will take a harder line against Georgia by actively supporting independence in Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and they point out that Russian bases in Georgia might be used to foment further troubles.
Nick Lazaridis, SDS Television Australia. Mr. President, it seems that the response from Russia is increasingly angry.
But despite the threats, the President remains unfazed by Russia's inflammatory rhetoric.
The Russian military destroyed the Caucasus, created problems here, created conflicts here, created mistrust of Russia here. And I think for Mr. Putin it's quite difficult to restore good name of Russia in the Caucasus, especially in Georgia.
Head north out of the capital and soon enough you'll see the Caucasus laid out in awesome splendour. Life here is slow and primitive by Tbilisi standards, but the Caucasus are a strategic part of the region. Deep within this mountain range lies the Pankisi Gorge, inaccessible and bordering Chechnya, where rebels are locked in a bitter struggle for independence from Russia. The gorge has long been considered a haven for terrorists and criminals. For Shevardnadze and his American partners, it's the ideal location to kick off their new anti-terror campaign. The Pankisi Gorge is a closed zone, but what goes on here has been of great interest to Akaki and his 60 Minutes team. Journalists are unwelcome, but with the agreement of the local governor, we managed to get a glimpse for a few hours at least. The journey here is not easy. We negotiate several roadblocks before reaching the first village. With no effective law here, a police escort was provided for our journey. The village of Tbilisi certainly doesn't look like a refuge for fundamentalist terrorists, but it does have a mosque. Nearly everyone here is Chechen, most of them refugees. We did see some armed men in military-style clothing, but they quickly disappeared. As we filmed, most men hid their faces or slid indoors. Within minutes of our arrival, it seemed that the only inhabitants of Tbilisi were old women and children. If you venture past Tbilisi and further up into the Pankisi Gorge, there are another 4 villages before you hit the Russian border, and beyond that is Chechnya. Now, the police won't take us any further than this because they say beyond here the area is lawless and in fact crawling with Chechen rebels. And kidnappings are common. One of our 2 police escorts was abducted from this Pankisi roadblock just a few weeks earlier by a local Chechen crime boss. He was released after a few days. In contrast to the constant warnings to be on our guard, the hospitality we received from Chechen refugee families was overwhelming, like this family of 8 living in the one room who insisted on providing us with a welcoming hot meal. Downstairs in a small room, Kvazhi Uzayev works on his portrait of the assassinated Chechen rebel leader, President Dudayev. Kvazhi fled the Russian bombs in Chechnya by walking through the mountains in the middle of winter, and he's had enough of Russian propaganda.
Chechen, он бандит, он террорист, он фундаменталист, он абрек, он и дикарь. В общем, все, что могло, все, что можно было сказать в адрес чеченцев, уже сказано. Ничем Россию не удивит. Больше нечему удивить чеченский народ.
Disregarding Georgia's international border, Russia has been bombing Pankisi villages off and on for several months. They claim Chechen independence fighters use the gorge as a base for attacks on Russia.
Тут террористов нет никаких, и бандитов нет. Если они называют террористов, бандитов, борцов за независимость, то это они могут как угодно называть, это их проблемы. Но бомбить точно бомбили, мы тоже слышали. Это недалеко, вон там вот за этой горой, вот и чуть выше вот здесь тоже бомбили, верхние села.
It's no surprise then that most residents prefer American involvement in Pankisi rather than Russian airstrikes.
ამერიკელები როგორც ელას სხვა განაცხო ხედავ რომ ამერიკელები ძალიან წესივრად და ყველაფრით ისე არც რუსებს არც ღმერთის წამს არც თავისი ლაქემას მაგათი სანდო არაფერი არ არის მაგათში.
Если Грузия решила, что у них должны быть американцы, значит, они должны быть. У нас нет никаких проблем. Это внутреннее дело Грузии. И пока нам оказывают содействие и нас принимают здесь, мы готовы выполнять законодательство и в соответствии с законами Грузии действовать именно вот как законопослушные граждане.
The 60 Minutes team has been combing the gorge for the last 12 months. In a series of blockbuster reports, they revealed the presence of Al-Qaeda terrorists and government-sponsored drug trafficking.
Pankisi was sort of a warehouse, so they have blog posts everywhere, and that way they conserve whatever is happening there. So it's like a warehouse. They bring in drugs, arms, and it's quite safe to keep it there, and they're making deals from there. Everyone takes bribes to escort terrorists or drugs or arms, and we did stories about that.
In March this year, 60 Minutes broadcast their most powerful Pankisi story yet, revealing that far from fighting terrorism in Chechnya, sections of the Russian military were running guns to Chechen militants. The program exposed the activities of a corrupt Georgian army colonel who was smuggling weapons from Russian military bases in Georgia to Chechen fighters in Pankisi Gorge.
საღამომშვიდობისა.
პირველ რიგში სენსაციური ვიდეო მასალა პანკიში იარაღით ვაჭრობის შესახებ. ჩვენ გაჩვენებთ, რომ შეიარაღება იქ ცხინვალის რეგიონში განლაგებული რუსეთის სამხედრო ნაწილებიდან შედის. იარაღის საბოლოო დანიშნულება ჩეჩნეთია. აშკარა ხდება, რომ რუსეთი პანკიში კი არ უნდა ცდილობდეს ანტიტერორისტულ ოპერაციაში ჩაბმას, არამედ საკუთარ სამხედრო ნაწილებში. ამ ფაქტის გამოაშკარავება ფესო კურტანიძემ ჩეჩნეთის უშიშროების ოფიცრის დახმარებით მოახერხა.
The 60-minute story was completed with the help of Chechen rebel intelligence officer Ayub Bakayev. The culprit was Georgian military colonel Tristan Sitalashvili, shown here. He agreed to deliver arms from the Russian base at Khinvali to Pankisi Gorge.
Да, из Хинвали, короче. Они хотят, короче, патроны хотят. До Тбилиси или до Ахмета надо доставить. До Ахмета, короче, доставим, только другой машиной возьмем.
Not only was the crooked colonel running guns to Chechen rebels, he also offered to kidnap a wealthy Georgian businessman from Tbilisi to take back to the Pankisi Gorge. Minutes after they left this restaurant, the waiting 60 Minutes crew was detained by police. Within a few days, the program was contacted by the colonel with a remarkable offer. He was willing to implicate his superiors in the racket if 60 Minutes dropped their report on him. His proposal was rejected.
This is the message from him. This is the bullet that went into our window the very same day. Yet nothing happens to this person. He's still out there. No interrogation has been ever conducted against him. And I guess we are still under threat as far as he's unpunished and no measures, no steps are taken against him.
Despite their best efforts, the police were unable to discover who fired the shot. And Ayub Bakayev, the Chechen rebel intelligence officer turned 60 Minutes informer, is also having troubles. He remains in hiding in fear of revenge from the colonel and a $10,000 contract on his life from his former rebel colleagues who declared him a traitor. The 60 Minutes story demonstrated that nothing in this strategic gorge is quite what it seems. And if America is helping Georgia prepare an assault on the gorge to flush out Al-Qaeda terrorists, then Akaki has more revelations. The terrorists are gone.
Well, based on our sources, it was a true story in the beginning that terrorists fled from Afghanistan, where some of them at least concentrated in Pankisi Gorge. But right after they started talking about the anti-terrorist operation, most of them, and in fact, by now, I guess all of them fled the region. They went back to Turkey and elsewhere.
If, as Akaki says, the terrorist threat has diminished, what exactly is America up to in Georgia? This is where you'll find the answer, several hundred kilometres away from the Pankisi Gorge. Here in Georgia's dry eastern interior, an oil pipeline slowly makes its way towards the horizon. It has a long way to go, but this is the real reason for America's newfound interest in Georgia and another sore point for Russia.
Americans are the greatest consumers of oil in the world, so their interest towards energy in the Caspian is absolutely natural. So the Russian interest also mostly based on oil.
Russia wants to build its own pipeline through war-torn Abkhazia, but the US, with its heavy investment in the nearby Caspian Sea oil industry, prefers this pipeline, and it's keen to protect its interest. It seems that Georgia's future is hostage to forces well beyond its control.
Georgia is weak, helpless, mostly. And Georgia is located strategically in a very sensitive place for Russia. Not only for Russia, but Russia believes that this is the most important key country in its policy in the Caucasus, in the whole area here. So Russians are trying to stay here militarily, politically, at least to maintain certain influence here. And all this time we're struggling with them.
As Georgia struggles to find its way in a post-Soviet world, there are those determined to enshrine hard-won freedoms. Akaki Gogichaishvili is adamant that free speech should prosper. This year, he established the 60-minute school for investigative journalists. He hopes to prepare 20 journalists a year who'll keep politicians on their toes.
If we're shut down, we hope we are trying to give our knowledge and experience to other people. So if we're separated from this business in some way, there will be others who will be willing and able to do the same thing.
Free speech may be catching on, but as Georgia's recent history shows, nothing can be taken for granted.
Looking from our standpoint, we are no longer receiving any pressure from the government. We don't have illusions that this will last forever, that the government decided to vote for democracy and free press, but it's just that I guess they're working on some new strategy, which is very scary. I mean, this is being waiting for worse every day, but so far so good, and we're doing our job.